together, because that was that type of business. And anyway, I got to be real good buddies with this one. They called us Mutt and Jeff. He's 6'3" and I'm 5'6", you know. So, but anyways, while we were in Japan, we was at the base store one day, and one of their cash registers broke. So this guy knew how to fix them, so he said, "Oh, I can fix that for you," and that kind of intrigued me. And then I came home on leave in January of '59, and I had 30 days leave. And back home now, my best buddy, Willie Wiedemann, his sister married, Stromberger, Ed Stromberger.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked for NCR Corporation.
NCR stands for?
National Cash Register.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we went to visit them one evening, and they lived in Fort Collins at that time. And Ed, we got to talking. He said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm fixing typewriters right now and watches and clocks." "Well, what are you going to do when you get out?" Because I was due to get out in a few months. I said, "I don't have a clue." He said, "Well, did you ever consider NCR?" Of course, at that time, they just called it National Cash Register yet.
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Well, no," but then I got thinking the guy I buddied with in the Navy worked for NCR, so he says, "Well, why don't you go down and talk to the boss in Denver?" So he wrote a letter of recommendation and sent it to Denver, and then I went down in them 30 days and applied, and was accepted. I had to take a little test on a mechanical test. So I had a job waiting for me when I got out of the Navy, which was good.
Yes.
So I've never had to look for a job in my life,
Yeah.
which is nice. But
So how much do you remember were you paid at that first job after the Navy, or?
$1.46 an hour.
And that was enough to support you and?
Oh yeah, I even bought a brand new car, making payments on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a good time. Anyway, then I worked in Denver for a few months as an apprentice. And then they transferred me to Fort Collins. Well, I wasn't married yet, so I was living at home with my parents. And I got to dating the local girl, an Aldergott girl. Barbara was her name. So we got married eventually. And they transferred me back to Denver. In fact, that's when I got married. I was actually in Denver. So we lived down there a few months. And then they transferred me again back to Fort Collins. Now I'm married. So we got a brand new home in Fort Collins and lived there 9 years. And had, while we were still in Denver, before we moved up, we had a daughter, our oldest daughter. And then they transferred me to Fort Collins for them 9 years, and we had 4 boys up there.
Whoa.
And they transferred me back to Denver, and we had 2 more girls.
Whoa.
So I had 7 children in all.
7 children.
Still do.
Still do. Oh.
And then they transferred me eventually to Sheridan, Wyoming. Loved it up there. And I was called a resident service tech. Lived in Sheridan, and my original office was in Casper, which was 150 miles away. And then eventually they transferred me to the Billings, Montana office, which was 135 miles away, but I still lived in Sheridan. So, and I took care of Sheridan and Buffalo, Wyoming, and Gillette, Wyoming. And we was up there for 9 years. Loved it.
Loved it. Why didn't you stay living there?
Well, had an opportunity to start my own business. The American dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have your own business. Go ahead.
No.
And my wife was working for a local office supply house up there. And they'd visit, and about things we'd like to do and all that. And her boss had this magazine he'd get once a month and said, "Hey, look, here's a business for sale in Loveland, Colorado." So we looked into it, and I thought, wow, there's our opportunity. So we came down and visited with the guy. It was a little typewriter shop. And we worked up a deal and said, well, it depends on selling our home up there. So we put it for sale, kind of privately. I didn't want the company to know what I was doing if this didn't work. So anyway, we sold the home and made the deal, and I gave NCR my 2 weeks notice, and they were kind of flabbergasted and devastated. But anyway, we ended up back in Loveland. And
So did you just repair typewriters, or what was it that you worked on?
well, when I worked for NCR, we
No.
fixed that,
Cash registers,
cash
but in
registers
Loveland,
and
at your business.
Well, that was just typewriters. Well, then I got involved in cash registers, of course, and copy machines. Pardon me. Mimeographs are long gone by
Yeah.
now. And office supplies, because my wife worked for the office supplies. She knew that end of it, and I was the repair end of it, and the salesman for the cash registers and the equipment. So anyway, we started in a little tiny place in Loveland, took over the guy that was in there, and then we was there only about 6 months, and we moved to a bigger location and expanded, and we did real well for 4 years. It kept growing every year and growing, and things were going good. We had bought a beautiful home in between Loveland and Fort Collins called Collins Center. In the 5th year, my wife come in the house one day. She says, "I don't love you anymore. I'm leaving." So out the door she went. And about 10 minutes later, she came back. Backed the car to the garage, opened the trunk, threw all of her clothes in, and took off again. And this time she was gone for good. Anyway, and she was half the business, and I didn't know that end of the business well, so anyway, I ended up going bankrupt and closing the business and starting over in life.
What did you learn from that situation? Because hard things happen.
You just learn how to live with them. I still had 4 kids at home, which she left also. But anyway, she's still alive, and her children still visit with her, and she don't want nothing to do with me, of course, but that's all right. And about a year later, I started going back to church again, and in Denver now, to a little group that I was going with, and there was a lady there going with her daughter from Loveland, and she drove down with another lady from Fort Collins. And finally the daughter says to her mom, she says, "Well, see if we can catch a ride with Charlie. He comes down here. I got a great big old Suburban. See if he can give us a ride down here." So they asked me, I said, "Sure, love the company, So we did that for about a year, and eventually we fell in love and got married. And at that time I'm 54, starting over in life. And let's see, how did that work? Had the business, lost it.
Well, you look
yeah. We had also opened another store in Windsor, and that wasn't off the ground yet. It wasn't paying for itself. And then we lost the store in Loveland because the guy sold it out from under us, so we had to move. And so we lost that big income there. So anyway, that's why I went bankrupt. But my second son was working for me at the time, and so he went out looking for a job. and he stopped in Fort Collins at Precision Equipment. They was an IBM dealership, and of course that's what I was working on also myself, was IBM typewriters mostly. Anyway, they told him, they said, well, no, we can't use you, but send your dad around.
So how did the computers that came in, did any of the skills from the typewriters transfer to that at all, or
Well,
nothing? Or was
okay,
there,
yeah.
I mean, it changed the usage of typewriters, I know that.
Oh yeah, well, way back then, we go back some years again, when I was working for NCR, computers were just getting started, the big mainframes, they were all run by tubes, big tubes, and run all these things. And IBM actually got started in that. And eventually NCR got involved in that also. And the first computer NCR had, they called it short rod memory computers. Getting away from tubes now, they're getting into some electronic diodes and solid state equipment. But of course we got into the accounting machines. We was big in accounting. We sold more proof machines to banks than anybody in the world.
What did those look like?
Oh, they were huge machines.
Okay.
The operator would sit down at it, and the checks would come in from the tellers upstairs. They would take them down to where they ran these proof machines, and they had a bunch of bins, pockets on them, and the first ones had little flippers on them. And when they put the key on the keyboard here for whatever department, then that flipper would open and they'd put the check in there from this stack of checks they got from the teller.
Wow.
And this was all mechanical stuff yet. Well, it had an electric motor in it, but all the parts in there were all mechanical, and it was a big machine. There was over 2,000 parts in one of these machines, 20,000 parts in one of these big machines. Anyway, and it graduated from there into some electronics, and it just was a gradual progression of switching over.
So with that said, before we wrap up the interview, tell me what things you think are relevant today for learning a trade or running a business or taking care of your family, or
What's relevant is, I guess, love. To get married and to have the love of your life. And that's what happened to my second marriage. Her first husband was an alcoholic for all of his life, and she finally got tired of that and left him, and for some reason my wife left me and we hooked up. But she was an excellent people person, and she had 7 children also. So now all of a sudden we got 14 kids between us. But when we got married, my youngest and her youngest were still with us. The rest were all already gone. But anyway, the values, you need to teach values to your children, and stick-to-itiveness. Today it's some, I don't feel like doing that, so just forget it. I'm not going to do that. And there's no commitment hardly today about anything. Not, some still have it. That's why there's still a few successful people, but the majority today are just floating around in life and don't know where to go.
Yeah. So, where do you think you'll go in the last hurrah of life? Where would you like to go, or what would you like to do in the last hurrah of life?
Just enjoy life. my wife and I, my second wife, we did everything together. She didn't have a girls' night out, and I didn't have a guys' night out. We did everything we did together. She'd go with me as often as she could on my trips because, you know, after losing NCR in my business and I went to work for other people, still fixing bank machines. So I never got out of that line, but we traveled all over the territory. We operated out of Fort Collins and took care of Cheyenne and eastern Colorado, Estes Park, and Meeker, and Steamboat Springs. And we traveled the whole territory. And whenever she could, she went with me, and we just enjoyed life that way.
Enjoying life is your...
But we did one year, we got together and we went to Israel. We visited the Holy Land. And that was quite a feat. But today, I have some of my children locally, and some of her children are local, and we get together quite often. In fact, I was over to her children, there was 4 of us together a week ago Monday.
So family, love, commitment.
Yes.
And enjoy.
And we teach Christianity. I'm kind of into the Bible and have taught my children and as best I can. Of course, we're all want to do our own thing in life, so some don't adhere to that, but that's all right. It's their choice. Anyway,
Well,
just teach godly principles.
and I think that's a great way to end, but I thank you, Charlie Griess, for your time, for your insight, for your stories, and God bless.
Well, thank you so much.